7 already. Can you believe it? So, just clear the throat. Hang on. Welcome everyone. It's episode 7 already of Tokyo Jazz Joints podcast. Welcome back. Great to have you with us. We're nearly up at the 5,000 listener mark since we began the podcast, which is absolutely, I would say, exceeded our expectations. So that's fantastic. I'm in Dublin. James is in Yokohama. I've been out this morning photographing some other projects and just getting a general feel for how weird things are in Dublin. And just getting my head back into Japan, back into the jazz joints. James, what is the state of play in Yokohama?
Absolutely dreadfully boring, but doing my best to stay busy. Music projects like this one, a little bit of regular money work, and I've been keeping an eye out on all the usual social media channels because, like we talked about, a little bit worried about some of these beautiful jazz joints that we have been discussing, you know. Pretty much everybody's closed at the moment. I've not heard of any shops that have closed for good, but, you know, they're in a pretty precarious situation. So let's keep our fingers crossed, though, that none of them disappear during the life of this podcast.
Hopefully not. So what are we talking about today, then?
Wow, today we're going to flip things around. I'm going to be your very Genki host. We're going to do a deep dive into what it is like to actually take these photographs in places that are challenging for a number of different reasons. I think that we kind of figured that even on the first night that we went out, where we were still testing what it would be like to do this project. You remember when we went to Pithecanthropus erectus, which we spoke about at length on episode 1. But what a strange sort of room that was. It was square, dusty, with rather odd lighting, bit narrow. And I remember you taking some pictures of the bathroom as well, which was interesting. What was your impression that first night as you approached it?
This is going to be hard. I think that was probably the first thought. I mean, it's not the easiest thing taking the photographs. I'm by no means a technical wizard. I think you can see that from the photographs. But, you know, I think it's really tough because the biggest pressure probably from a photography point of view is trying to do the places justice. And, you know, they are so special and you kind of want to almost give people that 360 degrees sort of virtual experience of it, which, you know, you can't do with a regular camera. So I think that's the first challenge, definitely. You mentioned that, it's funny you should mention the bathrooms actually, because one of the photographs which we still use and certainly used for a long time on social media and, you know, some business cards and things that we had printed up too was the famous quote that was attributed to Thelonious Monk, which was "Freedom and jazz go hand in hand." And I always remember that because it was scrawled in a black Sharpie pen on the back of the bathroom door. And I remember photographing that just with my phone because with a lot of these places, the bathroom tends to be, if you've ever been in a Japanese bathroom, they tend to be, you know, you need to be sort of a contortionist to get in and out of a lot of them because they're so small and so narrow.
I mean, think of an airplane bathroom.
Exactly.
Seriously,
Yeah,
that's the kind of space we're talking about. But that's so funny because I remember that Thelonious Monk quote and even the graffiti is super cool in these jazz bars. You know, I mean, it's like somebody took their time to actually write that in there.
I mean, I always wonder what they think, you know, because there's times I've definitely wandered into the toilet with my full camera over my shoulder, and it must look quite odd. And I think a lot of that is kind of that bemusement that we talked about before of the owners of like, why would you want to photograph a bathroom and B, you know, some, you know, skanky old posters and scribble graffiti on the walls. But of course we've seen in some of the bathrooms, you know, some of the graffiti on the walls is signatures by famous jazz musicians. I mean, I don't know if you remember that place in Sapporo where he had the bop / Duke, where he had kept the bathroom door from the original joint that had burnt down because it had some signatures on the door. Do you remember?
Incredible stuff. Yeah. And I mean, actually, there's a whole other sub-page of Tokyo Jazz Joints that could just be your phone pictures from the bathrooms, because so many of them do have unique sort of, decor, or just, like you said, signatures of musicians, random customers, a lot of memorabilia that's not necessarily jazz related. I can't remember the place where he had the really big poster of Steve McQueen, for whatever reason. But
yeah, I can't either. Yeah, but it's funny. I don't know if it's going to more of these places over time, or whether it's just a sign of the times. But I feel like a lot of those really unique bathrooms, are usually the first to go. If places decide to kind of try and upgrade a little bit, or do some renovations, it usually starts with a bathroom. Yeah. So you'll go into often quite grotty places, but then the bathroom looks just like a regular toilet in a Japanese apartment.
When we speak about Garo, I will be going on at length about the bathroom there. But
there's maybe an episode there in itself, just bathrooms.
Let's go to a place though that the bathroom's not even inside the bar, because it would be impossible. It's around the corner. Do you remember the night we went to a little town? They call them towns here in Tokyo because there's so many stations. It's only one stop away from Shinagawa, which is a big bullet train Shinkansen station. It's a little old station called Oimachi, which has the kind of old drinking alleyways we mentioned that Shinjuku is famous for. In Oimachi, though, this is not a place where tourists go. This is one of the few old drinking dens that still exists. It's not been torn down or burnt down over the years. And way, way down at the back of a second alleyway, a little bit farther from the station, is a place called Impro. Now, if you episode 7, I would hope all of our listeners right now have got the drill that you should be looking at the pictures as we talk about them. So
good idea.
If you head over to Tokyo Jazz Joints and look up Impro in Tokyo, you will see immediately what we're talking about. This place has, Philip, I'll let you take it away. What is the connection between Impro and Guinness?
And Guinness. Oh, now you throw me. So you couldn't remember that story earlier about the Guinness. Oh, Guinness. Oh, now I've got it. Yeah, sorry, I was thinking of a pint of Guinness. Yes. Well, okay, it's all coming back to me.
With Guinness there, but yeah,
like I said previously, they're just getting my head back into Japan and jazz joints. Yeah. Well, actually, I remember distinctly Impro because we did a lot of loitering, if I remember, and you can see it on the photograph, but this place is it is tiny. I mean, it's like a door, and maybe an extended bathroom at best. And from the outside, it's all sort of brown wood, and there's just a very subtle kind of carved sign that a couple of carved signs that say Impro in wood. And there was couple of regular houses or apartments next to it, then in a couple of bars sort of up on the second floor on that same little alleyway. And I remember standing around for quite a long time because, again, as we've said before, no opening hours, definitely no website. Lucky if you get a phone number in some of these places. And this was one of those examples because we had no idea, is it open? Is it going to ever open? Is it open today?
And not an easy place to find because it's not only down one of these narrow drinking alleyways, it's a sub-alleyway off of that. So I think we walked by 2 or 3 times before figuring out where it was.
Yeah. But I mean, eventually we did happily get in. And again, one of those sort of stories that we can probably go to in more detail when we get to the episode about the owners. But this guy, is a regular salary man, works in a company, probably boring job, sits in a cubicle most of the day, takes a lot of crap from his boss. And, on certain evenings, he comes down there and he opens this jazz bar. And I mean, to photograph the place was challenging to say the least. And so, in terms of all the places that we go, I have a kind of approach photographically, which I suppose is to be as unobtrusive as possible. So, we've mentioned before that we go in as customers and fans. We sit down, we engage the owners in conversation, we have a drink, have some snacks, and then generally we ask permission to photograph. But beyond that, what you see in the photographs is really what you would find if you go in these places. There's 1 or 2 exceptions, which we'll talk about in a bit, but I don't use flash because obviously it would wash out the atmosphere of these places. I don't use a tripod, because again, it's quite intrusive. And, we very rarely, and except if we're traveling long distances, call ahead because we're concerned that maybe, it'll be tidied up or it'll not necessarily look the way it normally looks. Or in some cases,
Certainly, I think for almost every place in the Tokyo area, we never contacted them.
Yeah.
We just showed up. I think that was a big part of it, though. We didn't want... as you've mentioned, and I think we talked about in other episodes as well, the owners, they could be a little surprised. Two random foreign guys coming in, asking questions, taking pictures, speaking Japanese. It takes a little bit of, schmoozing. And I think if you call ahead, that may cause them to be a little bit more worried, wondering, is this going to be something they're going to try to sell? I mean, it's just not very clear. So the whole point is to see the places and capture them as they are to the best of our abilities. Yeah.
And I mean, my memory of Impro is that it was just incredibly dark. I mean, and also very, very small. So it's hard, but, ironically, it's so small, it's quite hard in a photograph to give an idea of the scale of the place, because in actual fact, probably in the photographs, it looks more roomy maybe than it actually was. But I just remember, like I said, it's all handheld. So for the photographers listening, you really have to really go very high with that ISO, and you've got to really do what you can to get those images reasonably sharp, but doing them handheld on a very slow shutter speed. And you can see that particularly from Impro, because the photographs are so grainy. And, there's nothing wrong with that, but, sometimes the lack of perfection there probably annoys me a little bit. But I think, just to have got that place at all, because, for all we know, it mightn't have even been open, and we got lucky that night. But we got chatting to the owner, who again, was sort of interested in the project, but he was not keen because of the job that I've mentioned already to be photographed himself. But he did tell us a story, which was the connection with Guinness that you mentioned before. He had amazingly, and this is how easily these stories sometimes trip off the owner's tongues. He'd been in contact with the Guinness Book of Records to get this place registered as the smallest jazz bar in the world. And he'd gone to the stage of, letters going back and forth and trying to organize them to come and check out the place. And then, amazingly, he just gave up because, in his words, he wasn't really able to speak English much, and it got a bit difficult. And, rather than sort of finding someone who could help him or doing some translation or whatever it might be, he just kind of... he gave it up. And I think to me, that's really symptomatic of two things. One, the general humility that you find in Japan about these places. And secondly, just, the reason for doing them. It's not about acclaim. It's not about publicity. It's just, as corny and cliched as it might sound, like a lot of the owners are just running these places for the pure love of it, for the passion that they have for the music.
That is so true. And I mean, like, it ties in what you just said there. This guy's a working guy, daily salaryman life. So it's not easy to put in those kind of hours, come down, run the bar until about midnight, 12:30, 3-4 nights a week. He's not open every day of the week. But yeah, you can feel when you talk. I remember when talking with him, though, it's, he was implying in very subtle ways how he wished he could just run the bar full time, but it's just not financially feasible, especially if he's coming, we don't know his own personal situation, but you would imagine the pay cut he would take from a company job to running this tiny bar that really can only fit, I would say, 6 customers at a time, about 4 at the counter. And then remember, there was a tiny little corner space with a table, which we happened to be able to sit at.
That's right.
And back to what you were discussing about the actual act of taking the pictures as well. You forgot to mention that, half the time we've got to climb over people. You've got to be able to take angles where you can navigate and fit yourself, but also, we're not really ever supposed to take pictures of the customers. Now, we've broken that rule a few times. I know you have on some of the great ones, but generally, if there are customers in the bar, the owners will be like, yeah, go ahead and take whatever you want, but don't put anybody's face in there. That's sort of the Japanese custom or manner. So a lot of times you're limited in whatever sort of spot you can get to. And I think in Impro as well, there were 2 guys near the front of the bar. It's probably why you weren't able to get an entire long view of it.
Yeah, I think, to anyone who's traveled with me, I'm thinking of my friend Tom in particular, they'll be used to sort of walking along the street and then turning around to speak to me and discover that I'm gone. And, to be found sort of crouching in some corner or hidden in some doorway trying to photograph something. And the jazz bar is exactly the same. Like, there's a lot of crouching down and like getting yourself backed into a corner as tightly as you can just to try and get a little bit more of an angle or a bit more of a range on the even though I'm using a sort of a wider lens, just to try and give it a sense of the scale and a sense of the ambience. Just looking at the photographs before we move on, for impro, I noticed that one of them was the original sleeve of Pithecanthropus erectus, which, of course, if you're listening to the podcast now regularly, you'll know that is the first place that we shot any of these jazz bars at the very beginning of the project, and obviously the Charles Mingus album as well. And I just thought it was a nice little callback, I think comedians call it, where we found this record sleeve in a different bar, 50 or 60 joints down the line. So it was a nice one to be able to capture as well.
I think that would be known as a Tokyo Jazz Joints deep cut. But there you go. Can save the podcast jargon for
spin-off series.
Another day, anyway. Yes. Going from improv to another place that had a similar but very different atmosphere, but similar challenge. The incredible Prez. P-R-E-S. Now, Prez in Shibuya is a very, very unique spot for a number of reasons. One, because of where it's located. People who visited visited Tokyo before, will be very familiar with the Shibuya neighborhood, which today is not known as a very jazzy place. The jazz kiseten that used to be all around the station, pretty much all gone. But Prez is located in the basement of what is called Center Road, Sentergai in Tokyo, in Shibuya, which is pretty much teenage central. So not a neighborhood that Philip nor I would ever be hanging out in generally.
Just speak for yourself, James. Speak for yourself. Some of us are older than others.
And amazingly enough, though, we found Prez. I think I had been there before. I had been there a couple years previously, and I really liked it, but hadn't really been back. It's a little bit expensive, little cocktail bar sort of atmosphere. And I don't think I actually appreciated how beautiful it was until we did go back, because we went and we had time to sit and talk with them. We went early. It was just more of a relaxed atmosphere, and I had time to look at the incredible murals that surround this sort of U-shaped bar. And if you're looking at the pictures now, you can see the second one is, of course, a gigantic black and white mural of Lester Young, known as Prez. That was his nickname. So what do you remember about trying to get pictures in this place? I think this was the single darkest bar that we visited, no?
Yeah, I mean, again, in some ways, like you say, very similar to impro, just absolute, like literally photographing in darkness with no flash. And I remember sort of, really pushing the camera and sort of securing it on the bar with my hands and my body to try and get the murals from a distance without any shake. But in some ways, the complete antithesis of impro as well, because it was actually huge, quite a large place. To me, it would be a classic sort of, like, if you wanted to film a scene in a jazz bar, it would be like the ideal location, if any location managers are listening. But like, it just was beautiful. And then obviously if you look through the pictures, you can see again, huge mural of Billie Holiday, and obviously Billie Holiday and Lester Young had a very intense and sort of deep connection in many ways. Then there's also, I think, Count Basie and Duke Ellington on the other side. And I mean, it's just this big, heavy sort of mahogany bar area, a few tables off around the edges, and then these gorgeous, gorgeous murals. And it was a very challenging place to photograph. It just so dark. And I think possibly that they just lifted the lights even slightly, but I remember even then it didn't help too much. So I'm pretty pleased with how they turned out, and it was good that we were able to capture them. There's also that gorgeous, gorgeous painting, which, if I was a different person, I would have popped in my bag as I was leaving of Coltrane that's sort of lit by the little lamp above it, and it's just beautiful. So gorgeous bar.
Very sleek, gorgeous bar. And I think you did a great job, because I'm looking at the pictures right now, the one you mentioned of Les Young and Billie Holiday, and then Count Basie, which is just great. Yeah. I mean, that's just, I got to go back and have a drink there as soon as we can get out of the house again. It's been a couple years. I don't think I've been back since we took those pictures, actually. So
it's a strange place too, though, like, because, you know, I mean, Shibuya, probably, if you even if you haven't been to Japan, you've ever seen anything about Tokyo, you know, Shibuya always makes the cut, you know, because of various reasons, not least the famous sort of scramble crossing by the station. But it really is like an amazing you know, contrast. You know, you're in Shibuya in all the craziness that entails, and then you step through this big heavy door, down a little staircase, and you're in this just oasis of a place with beautiful sound, you know, beautiful interior. And like you say, maybe a little expensive, but that's maybe to be expected where it is. But just a complete and utter contrast from what sits around it on the first floor, you know. So it's a great place. I remember that night I was getting a bit annoyed though, because if I'm not mistaken, there was a couple of sort of tourists I think maybe came in, and we definitely got our sort of we got our knickers in a twist a little bit, didn't we? And I remember them being quite loud and a bit sort of like.
Please don't say they were American, please.
I wouldn't dream of it. It was more of a sports bar vibe, I think, was what I'd probably describe it. So I remember.
I think that's the interesting thing, is that because of the location, you know, we mentioned how a lot of the jazz joints, the high majority of them really are neighborhoods that are, you know, either a little bit more run down, not necessarily popular or trendy. But this one being where it is, definitely there's going to be people who go in there who are not necessarily looking for a jazz bar. They're just in Shibuya looking for a place to drink, you know, maybe a quiet place to drink.
Yeah.
I remember though, the last time, or the time I was there before you, the only people in the bar were businessmen coming in a sort of like a post-meeting, you know, wrap up. I could hear from the quiet way they were talking, you know, that some big meeting had gone down, and they were all celebrating with martinis. It was a bit of a Mad Men type of vibe going on.
It's got that kind of feel, hasn't it? I sort of imagine, I can't remember the exact date of its opening, but I sort of imagine just obscene amounts of cash being bandied about there back in the bubble years by various people.
And
it's got that feel, doesn't it?
Years, yes. Well, another place with a very, very different type of challenge to what we talked about for Impro and Prez, though. And unfortunately, this is not one that I was able to join you with. It's in Kobe. Kobe is the port city in western Japan, right next to Osaka. Kobe's got a great jazz tradition as well, as basically all Japanese cities do. When I made it down to Kobe a couple years, I think it was maybe a year after you did, and I was planning to go to Java, this joint we're about to talk about here, with a very, very old cafe, but they were closed. So, you know, I didn't get to go in, but you had a very unique adventure in there. Can you tell us about the ladies that you met, and why none of them appear in the photos?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Kobe, like you said, it's one of those, I suppose, more foreign cities, quote unquote, you know, traditionally a port city, a bit like Yokohama. So it was sort of more open and had quite a large foreign community. So there may be some connection there as well with the music. But I was actually on a work trip and had sneaked off once I'd, of course, completed the duties that I was expected to do, to check out the jazz bars. I didn't want to miss the opportunity. And this one, I was with a friend, actually. We were on this trip together. And right below the tracks, you know, so again, for those of you who haven't been to Japan, there's a lot of bars, restaurants, and shops you'll find directly, you know, in units under train tracks and in lots of station areas. And this one had been there since 1956, which is really astonishing. I mean, it's like over 60 years old now, you know, which is just, I just find is just really incredible when you think about it, you know. And it's very hard to describe. I mean, I remember going through the door, getting sort of an interesting look from two old ladies who I can only assume were sisters. They must have been in their mid-80s, I would say. You know, clearly had lived together for many years, you know, knew each other inside out, you know, almost like a comedy sort of double act kind of vibe about them. And they sort of ushered me over to this table. And if you're looking at the photographs, which you definitely should be for this one, you can find them on www.tokyojazzjoints.com, and it's Java. And there's one where you can see an old sound system with an Art Blakey Jazz Messengers album cover, and just off to the right you can see there's some seating. So there was various tables down there, and it had a very much of an old Japanese coffee shop vibe, sort of ice cream floats and that kind of things on the menu. And we were ushered down there, and then when she came to take the order, she spotted this camera. And I was just about to ask permission, and she sort of said, "Sorry, what are you doing?" And so I, as normal, I explained in Japanese what the project was. And very, very suspicious, and probably the most I'd say the most suspicious reaction that I've probably had from, 160 odd places. And it was only when I got sort of rather begrudging permission to photograph the place that I realized what it was, because just in the foreground of that picture where you can see the sound system, there was this amazing counter kitchen area. And all around the floor, around that area, was just stacks and stacks of old, almost like antique newspapers. And as soon as I asked to photograph the place, this amazing cleanup operation began of these newspapers, and trying to and as we mentioned before in the podcast, there's a thing in Japan with sort of cleanliness and dirtiness, and what looks right and what looks wrong, and so on and so forth. So they obviously didn't want this this image of the place projected. So they started to clean up all these newspapers, and it was kind of a shame because I really wanted to photograph that just as it was. And the reason that there's only that one photograph of the interior is because basically that's the only photograph I was allowed to take. So she said, "Well, here you go, you can take this." She was standing off to my left. And what really amazed me was this woman in her mid-80s. She insisted on seeing the photograph that I'd taken. So there wasn't going to be any case of me sneaking any pictures, additional
which
shots.
You've done a few times before.
Yeah, of course. Surreptitiously now and again you can capture the odd image, and sometimes you get this sort of happy accident where you get a beautiful shot. But oh no, this place. So she wanted to see the screen. I had to show her. She kind of signed off on it. And then, I thought, out of respect for her, we sat down, Tom and I, we had a drink. I put my camera away, and we left. So, who knows? I haven't been to Kobe since that time. It may or may not be there, but again.
Well, breaking news here on the TJJ podcast.
Oh, exciting!
As you were talking, of course, I was listening intently, but I was having a quick look online to the Japanese sites. Java is still open. They've got an announcement. They don't have a website, but it's on one of the portal sort of foodie and cafe sites in Japanese. That says, due to the coronavirus situation, opening hours will be flexible. Please call before coming by. So they are still open. What's interesting is that, on some of these sort of food sites in Japan, food and bar sites, you'll often have a photo album. There'll be 20 or 30 pictures of the place that you're looking to go, the cafe or restaurant. But with Java, almost all the pictures are either the exterior or just the sort of like snacks and coffee that you get there. There's only 2 pictures of actually the inside of the store. So I don't think she was being strict just with you. Maybe that's just their policies. They just don't want people taking pictures of the interior.
And I think it links back again, to that thing that we talked about before about modernity, particularly, I think. And, maybe as fans and so on, we look at that sound system and think, I would sell my children to have that in my house. But actually for them, it's maybe a source of shame in the sense of like, we'd love to update this. It's so old. It's so kind of boroi, and we want to get rid of it, but we can't, or, we're not able to, or whatever. Whereas we look at it very differently. And I suppose that probably extends to the places in general, and that sense of bemusement that a lot of the owners have, that, why would you want to photograph this? It's just an old, it's an old scuzzy jazz bar, what on earth's attractive about it? But again, to preserve these places, and the fact that they've lasted and survived this long is the whole purpose of the project.
Yeah, and we mentioned as well about some of the owners being, a very advanced age. That's also a big part of it, is because, they've seen changes in Japan that we can only really imagine. A lot of these places were opened previously to what we call the bubble years, the big economic boom of the 80s, right? And, the jazz joints back in the 50s and 60s, definitely in, rougher streets, not a trendy image at all. So they're so baffled by not just us being non-Japanese guys walking in, but as you said, like our appreciation of of what we perceive to be the beauty of these spots. I think sometimes it doesn't really sink through. Maybe they think we're just trying to, I don't know, take tourist pictures or whatever. I would be really interested to go back to Java to sit down and spend an afternoon with the ladies and sort of like get their perspective on that. Because as we mentioned, that's not a reaction you've had anywhere else. Sometimes the owner doesn't want their portrait taken for whatever reasons, health reasons or just shyness. But to actually say, no, just take this one angle picture of the entire room. Yeah. I think that's the only time that's ever happened. But I noticed that you did happen to get a little bit of the space where people do sit on the right side of that frame, where you mentioned where the stereo is with the Art Blakey record.
Yeah, I was pushing the limits there as best I could just to see what I could get in, but I knew that it was going to be quality control checked, so I had to sort of walk a fine line. It's funny you should mention there about owners not wanting to be photographed. I mean, if you go onto the site, under the joints tab, you can actually see there's a page dedicated to the owners, with portraits of all the owners that I've photographed. And an interesting sort of anomaly to that is Full House in Tokyo, because I remember going there one afternoon. I think we'd been to a couple of places, so I remember, being quite relaxed by that stage, shall we say? But we went in,
and also this is quite. I mean, for people who haven't visited the Tokyo metro area, I mean, it's absolutely massive. So Full House is a place way east.
That's right.
Of Central. So a good hour at least on the train east, still in Tokyo City, to a neighborhood that how would we put this delicately?
Not your forte. Not your forte.
No. I was very comfortable there. A little bit of gangsterism going on there. That kind of neighborhood in Koiwa.
How delicate. Yeah.
quite a famous Yakuza neighborhood.
There we have it. There we go. There we go. Yeah.
So I mean, it's into Full House, and what was the interesting thing about Full House that you saw as soon as we walked in?
Well, I mean, I think, it had that gorgeous sign, and it was one of those places that, again, just, looked like a museum. I mean, the record collection, they had these mad flower arrangements, they had this gorgeous turntable, this huge bookcase, I remember, full of all the videos, the jazz videos, all catalogued beautifully.
I spent a good 15 minutes looking at that. I mean, just epic stuff on VHS. That probably is the kind of thing that, if somebody would take the time to upload some of that stuff to YouTube, jazz fans around the world would start crying,
Yeah,
and he's got it all here in his shop, yeah.
Yeah, and if you've ever come across a book called How to Live Japanese, there's actually a photograph of the front of Full House from the project. It's you'll see James in his usual incognito role where he's just getting in the frame without realizing it. But you can see that photo in that book. But as we were leaving, I think it's probably notable because in terms of photographing the owners, it's a bit of an anomaly that the owner showed us out to the door, out of courtesy, not because we'd been misbehaving or anything like that. But I did just pluck up the courage as I was leaving to ask him if he wouldn't mind being photographed. And actually, it always sticks in my head, he said, no, I don't want to be photographed because when that happens, you lose a little bit of your soul. And I just,
just gorgeous.
What do you say, right? You just sort of say, yep, okay, no response to that. Fine, not a problem, thanks a lot, and you kind of move on. And as a photographer, like, there's always those regrets. You think, oh, I wish I'd photographed this, or I wish I'd got that, or whatever. And I suppose that's one of those things. But again, if you want to do this project right, and you want to do it through negotiating the access to the places, you have to kind of respect it. And if people don't want to be photographed and so on, then fair enough. So
we did mention that there are the occasional pictures where customers do get into the frame, and one of my absolute all-time favorites, one of my favorite bars anyway, but definitely one of my favorite photos of the project, is in Paper Moon in Ikebukuro. Paper Moon is, I would say it's definitely in my top 10 favorite jazz spots in the whole country. If you're looking at the pictures, you'll see right away it's got an unbelievable sign. I don't know the significance of the bull, of what that has to do with the name of the joint, but it's a very striking painting. It says booze and bar and jazz, Paper Moon. Paper Moon is written in Japanese at the bottom. And then on the right, you see the owner, Yamamoto-san, is this real sweetheart. Sweet guy standing in the door there with his, vast collection of vinyl. But definitely one of my favorite pictures ever is you capturing the customer at the bar with his head down on the counter, a couple bottles in front of him, an Ornette Coleman album on the stereo. This was right after Ornette Coleman passed away, I believe.
It was actually the night after, and I remember that being so significant because I managed to snap this guy just as he drifted off. I mean, if you've ever visited Japan, this is a very familiar sight. People asleep, seemingly, sitting up or standing up, whether it's on a train or in a jazz bar. And somehow I got round the back. That's probably a good example of me sort of crouching down in a corner because I really wanted to get that Ornette Coleman Trio album in because I remember him putting it on. I think he talked about it. And I remember specifically it being the night after that Ornette Coleman passed away. And by that stage, the guy had sort of gone from his sitting, sleeping into full on head on the counter. And just really happy to get that shot. We generally don't photograph customers, but I think now and again, as a photographer, there maybe are exceptions. And when I saw that one with the bottles and the guy at the other side of the bar, I just thought it can't be missed. And that photograph hanging.
What was interesting because when I don't know if you remember this, when we were discussing about doing the exhibition that we had of the photos here in Tokyo in Shimokitazawa at Jazzy Sports, sorry. I do remember we discussed that, maybe we can use the one with his head on the bar because you can't see his face. But the one where he's just got his eyes closed, maybe we should hold off on that. And not that this guy's ever going to come see an exhibition by the two of us, right? But just out of a sense of manner, I think that people would not be like, oh, you're going around taking pictures of unwilling people. That's a very sensitive thing in Japan. And so I think it was better that we did use that. And also, as you just said, it captures perfectly the ambiance of these bars, because if you look really carefully behind him, he's got his head on the bar, right? You got the Ornette Coleman in the front of the frame. Behind him, you see a slightly younger couple. I remember they were sitting there. I think they were co-workers or whatever, coming by for a drink. And they were just, not fussed at all. They went on with their conversation, laughing, smiling, having a drink, not even sure how much they were listening to the Ornette album. And just right next to them is this kind of older, regular customer there, pretty well passed out with his head. I mean, he had his head down there for a good half an hour after that, I remember.
I mean, it's just such a unique space. I mean, I remember it just looks like someone has moved a record collection into sort of an abandoned building because, we sat at the bar, and if you have a look at the photograph with the advertising drinks, if you can't read Japanese, there's red and white wine there. And then sparkling wine for 3,000 yen a bottle. And I remember I was laughing at the time thinking, like, what would that be if we ordered that, or how long has it been there? And it's funny because it's a real favorite, I think. I know the guys from Rhinoceros are big fans of Paper Moon. I know Jerome Schmidt, who's a big fan of the project as well. A huge record collector, spends a lot of time in Japan. He loves it. He seems to go there. It's almost like his local when he stays there. So.
The really cool thing there is because Yamamoto-san, the owner, is not only is he friendly, but he really loves talking music. So if you want to geek out about, and you can see the records and CDs in one of the pictures, that's just a portion of his collection. He's got a lot more at home, but it's funny. The sign with the wine and the sparkling wine. I remember before I had taken you there once, the first time I went, I ordered a beer. It was one of those, big green bottles of Heartland, which is a local brew here made by Kirin. So normally the kind of beer you don't want to drink holding the bottle, 500 milliliters, quite heavy. And so he was like, "Oh, I'll get you a glass." And he put a glass on the counter that, I mean, this looked like it could have been used by about 40 different people before washing, And Philip, as you know, having spent many nights with me in bars, I can be a little bit finicky about that kind of thing. So
I'd say germaphobe is an understatement.
I politely declined the use of the glass and drank straight from the bottle, which is probably what I would do on any subsequent visit. But beyond that, I mean, just an unbelievable spot, and it's just it's so great you were able to capture that shot with the Ornette Coleman record there. I mean, to me, that is everything when I think of the Japanese jazz bars in this picture: the booze, the great original record, the regular customer by himself maybe had a bad day, drank his beer and shochu a little too quick, puts his head on the bar, and then a couple people just having a good time in the background. I mean, it's just a wonderful picture.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to the photographing angle as well, I think, one of the challenges photographing is definitely timing. And I learned very quickly in the project to take my chances because, I've mentioned before, maybe at the start, I was a bit more reticent. Maybe you didn't want to get in the way. You didn't want anyone to shout at you. I know this all goes back to a traumatic experience I had a long time ago in Jerusalem where I remember someone threw an orange at me as I was photographing them. And I think probably if I was to get on the therapist's couch, it probably all goes back to that. But I have this sort of immortal fear of, someone sort of screaming at me as I'm taking a photograph. So, but I learned really quickly you have to take your chances because... things move very quickly, and sometimes there's this gorgeous shot, and then suddenly two people come in, and maybe we're going to 2 or 3 places, so we can't stay for 2-3 hours and wait for them to move. I'm certainly not going to ask them to move, so you've kind of got to snap it. And I missed a couple of shots earlier on in the project, and I think from that I realized, you've got to move quickly because the one of him sleeping, for example, is a good example of that. And if you want to have a look even at Kent, I don't know if you remember Kent. I don't remember off the top of my head exactly where it is.
Kent is down by Yokosuka, down the coast, south of Tokyo, near the big naval base, big U.S.
I mean, I always remember
yes.
Kent as being another classic example of that because, again, beautiful place inside, like stepping back in time. But again, there was a lot of coming and going and people in and out. And, all it takes is one person to sit in a place and, you maybe have this, as best you can, you have this feast. I think it's actually the shot of the table with the ashtray. And I'm fairly sure there was someone sat there and they went to the toilet. And in that 1 minute, I managed to get that shot. And so,
I remember that, yeah. Well, that's the thing is because, people should realize when we go into these, but we're often trying to hit a couple joints in a row, sometimes longer on a long day, And I think that the sort of unspoken system is we sit down together, we order our drink, we get the permission, and then you discreetly go off while I drink with the owner, which is, it's a tough job, but I do it because I want to really do a good project, Philip. Hope you appreciate that. I put a lot of beer down
just
myself,
if I could just put on record here, James, for listeners, that there is one exception to that, and we'll talk about Sapporo joints in a different episode, but I do distinctly remember being in Jericho, which if you know the project, you'll know it from a picture of the owner actually sort of surrounded by records and jazz magazines, and he's asleep. And I remember, I think that was 3 or 4 places in that night, and you had been chatting to him, and then I started to photograph, and then he started talking to me, and I was thinking in my head, this is not how it works because he should be engaged with you. And of course, I looked over to the side of the bar and you, much like the customer in Paper Moon, were doing the sleeping, sitting up thing. And I remember thinking, now I've got to try and photograph this place and keep him talking. And meanwhile,
in my defense, that wasn't the 4th or 5th place. That was about the 8th or 9th place because we started the morning in Hakodate, in the southern part of Hokkaido.
I'll give you that.
That's going to be a fun episode too, our Hokkaido trip. 1 day, 2 cities, and a lot of jazz spots. But yes, I do remember Jericho. I do remember slightly being under the weather by that point. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just thinking about Sapporo, just briefly, I think Bossa is probably a really good place to talk about. Actually, it's on the website already, but it's not in Bossa. It was kind of it was from the sublime to the ridiculous, I suppose, because it wasn't a case of one customer. I remember we went there later in the evening. And I suppose a lot of the times we're used to going into these places and just finding maybe one or two customers, if not just the owner on his own or her own. And then, of course, we went into Boss at night, and you wouldn't know it from these pictures, but it was absolutely rammed. I mean, it was like a full-on regular bar restaurant on a Friday night kind of vibe,
which was incredible because it's again, we've never experienced that, but in looking back now, where the bar is on a very, very main central street in Sapporo. It's not tucked away at all. And I think it's very well known. It's an old place, but it's not particularly, it's not dingy. It's well lit. The sound is great. And you can see the really big windows in there. So in the daytime, it's nice for coffee. But I remember we were shocked when we walked in because we didn't even think we can get a seat. I think they had to sneak us way to the back counter, and we were kind of cramped in next to a bunch of other people.
That's right. Yeah.
And then you turn around and then you look and you've got a couple different angles of all of the vinyl along the walls and the back, and it's just like, oh my god, this is a real jazz joint. Where did all these people come from? It's strange though, I was both happy and sad about that. I was happy that they had a lot of customers, but also a little bit like, but is everybody here appreciating, and how are we going to get a good picture? I think you gave up the idea right away. I think you just said we got to come back in the morning.
Yeah, which we did. I remember in a mad rush, and again, we'll talk about that whole trip up north in a separate episode. But I also remember it perhaps for the and not that everyone should necessarily be interested, but generally we get sort of bemusement or genuine interest or fascination in the project from the owners. But again, busy Friday night, busy bar, and I remember you going over and just chatting to the owner and handing him over a business card from the project, and literally not even the slightest interest, right? I mean, it was like sort of a shrug and like, oh, right, okay, good for you. And, we just decided in the end to not photograph it at all, and just, I think, had a drink and left, and came back the next morning, and of course it was empty. And again, even come back in the morning, it was a kind of it was like, yeah, sure, whatever, fine. But, not that makes any difference. We got to see the place, we got to photograph it as it is, but it just was interesting because the reaction, I suppose, was different to the one that we normally expect. So
yeah, I think that was a function of it being it's probably the most well known jazz bar in Sapporo. It's been photographed a lot with all the magazines, with all the people who are doing jazz blogs in Japanese. So I got the feeling that what we had said to him was probably not that exciting. Whereas all the other places, we may have been really the first people to ever ask, can we take a whole bunch of pictures? We're certainly the first foreign people ever to ask that. I mean, a lot of the places we've been the first foreign customers they've ever had. They've told us that,
Yeah.
But here, he definitely had the kind of air about him of like, oh, yeah, okay, that's fine. Take a couple pictures and get out of here, like not interested in even seeing them. So I was like, okay, that's fair enough, It's still a beautiful joint.
Yeah, gorgeous place. And we'll cover our whole mad trip to Sapporo back in 2018 in a separate episode for sure. We were going to maybe just chat maybe one more place. I know I noticed you've got Root Down in the notes. Root Down is probably one of my regrets in the project, photographically speaking. The photographs are not great. They don't really do the place justice. And I suppose if I was able to choose a few places to go back and reshoot, definitely Root Down would be one of them. It was pretty dark. It was pretty early on the days of the project. And I just never quite felt sort of happy with those shots. That won't stop anyone who's listening, of course, going and having a look at them, because Root Down itself, fantastic place. Beautiful bar, very, very nice owner.
Well, got to speak in the past tense there, Philip. Root Down closed.
Of course it did. That's right.
Yeah, it closed. Well, no, this version closed. I should say this version closed because the building was going to be torn down. Although he and his family owned the building, so it wasn't a case of them being torn down.
That's right.
But they have moved. They moved just down the street. To another this was a first floor, street level bar. And from the photos I've seen, just a couple of real tiny ones online, it doesn't look that different. It looks like he's kept it quite similar in terms of decor. So I will get back there as soon as possible. And go and have a chat. Really nice guy, Yoshikawa-san. I mean, he actually turned the lights up too. Remember? Because there was no way you would have gotten the photos without him putting the lights on.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, like I've said, not delighted with the photographs, but when you do look at them, there's one particularly that I managed quite early on as well to get a photograph of him, and it's hard to tell whether he's posing for the photograph or he's just about to sort of charge at me and kill me. I mean, he looks, for being such a nice guy, he looks terrifying. He's sort of got one arm up against the wall and sort of scowling at the camera, and it's a great shot of him. I mean, the other thing that probably is notable for people that haven't been to these places, and again, this is quite rare for even jazz bars, but it actually has a little family Butsudan sort of shrine up between the two speakers,
yes,
which again...
you can see, that's right. If you look above, between the speakers, you see that arrow. And that's called like a tsuna. It's a rope. You see that in Shinto shrines in Japan, and those white paper that looks like lightning bolts. This is what you find in Shinto shrines here in Japan. So he's created that as a sort of a shrine to music. I did ask him about that. I said, I've not seen sort of this religious like symbols and stuff. And he said, it's for good luck, to bring in customers and to keep the place free of evil spirits and whatnot. And he was very matter of fact about keeping the evil spirits out, and I was like, oh, okay, like our man in Full House talking about his soul being taken by the camera. It's interesting. In Japan, supposedly a very a religious place, but you do hear a lot of these types of comments just come out randomly. So he was very concerned about keeping the place spiritually clean, but also not visually, but so much like the sound comes from where you have this sort of temple, like it's a temple of sound.
Yeah. It's. I mean, it's. Japan has a very practical and pragmatic approach to religion anyway, and always an interesting mixture, I mean, we talked about it with samurai as well, but a very unique kind of thing, and not perhaps something that you expect to find in a lot of these places. But just to wrap things up then, we were going to maybe just chat very briefly about Tomen Keigo as well, which is not the easiest one to pronounce. Remind me where that one was then.
This is in an area called Kichijoji, a very popular area in western Tokyo, and the cafe is right along the big Inokashira Park. It's not one that we had on our list initially. Someone had told me about it. I'd never been there. And they said I was having coffee. A friend was having coffee in there, and the guy was playing jazz records, so you should go. So when we went in, we weren't sure what kind of vibe to expect. And as you can see from the pictures, it's a beautifully redone old Japanese apartment with a lot of jazz records and big speakers. Definitely more on the cafe side rather than the jazz cafe side, but a really beautiful little spot. But the man in there at first was extremely not into us taking pictures. He said, "I'm sorry, I've got a strict rule. I don't want people taking pictures in here." He was nice about it. But once we explained the project, and also, that we knew similar people sort of in the jazz cafe world, then he opened up quite warmly. And it was like, oh, okay, look, just wait till that customer leaves, and then you can take whatever pictures you want. So we had to wait around a little bit. But I think you captured pretty well the kind of homey vibe of this place. And this is the kind of a little bit of a mixture of like the old style jazz kiseten, but also the newer wave that's a little more customer friendly. You can see it's quite clean. It's non-smoking. It's very much sort of trying to get younger customers, lady customers, to come in as well. Just a beautiful little joint that was one that we were pretty lucky to discover very randomly.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you look at it or you go to it, I mean, it's sort of part jazz bar, part antique shop, isn't it, really? I mean, it's got that look of this, kind of mid-century modern, furniture shop that, and a gorgeous space to sit in. I mean, you can kind of sit in somewhere like that and you're overlooking, Kashira Park, and, you can just imagine, your life being 20 different things than it is at the moment. And, it's just a beautiful, relaxing space to be. I feel like a lot of the stories that we talk about, I mention how hot and sweaty, and people may just be thinking I'm a very sweaty person, but
that'd probably be true.
Whoa. Yeah. I do remember it being a sort of a more summery day when we went over there, and I think the windows were all open, and we kind of sat patiently and waited for the customers. I think it was just behind that screen to leave. And again, it was just one of those things where it was a fairly popular place. It wasn't neglected or ignored by any means. And so, we had to move fairly quickly and just capture as many of the photographs as I possibly could in the time that we had. But a gorgeous, gorgeous joint. And, again, if you've been to Tokyo and you've seen the sort of architectural aesthetic, you'll appreciate that sort of awful metal door that exists on so many sort of tiny apartment buildings that opens up into it. And what a difference from the outside to the inside, that awful sort of white fake stone exterior, and then you go in and it's this beautiful warm wooden interior. And I mean, again, really, really nice place, and not somewhere that's maybe one of the headline joints in the project, not somewhere that's one of the places that gets pushed to the forefront particularly, but again, it just shows the richness and the variety of the places that exist for this reason. It's fantastic.
Well, I think that's probably where we should leave off for today.
Yep.
We've gone coming close to the hour mark. Thank you for all of the great insight into the photo process. I know that we'll probably get a lot of questions from professional photographers out there. I do, not jokingly, actually, I have a professional photographer friend who wants to discuss that with you. Because
you mean apart from me, obviously? Or am I your special photographer friend?
Yeah, no, you're more on the friend side. I'm not really sure I trust the photo side. Looking back at the pictures tonight, there are a few more problems, but maybe
we'll discuss this offline.
Yeah, that's offline. Yeah, but as always, thank you for listening. And Philip, where are we going to be heading next week? You want to give any spoilers, or
I know where
so much to choose from.
I know where people should be heading straight after this is back into the project, www.tokyojazz.com. I did a bit of maths last night, and there's 133 joints on the site. So if you say there's roughly 5 to 6 photographs for each joint, that's over 1,000. So get on there, have a look, scour through the different joints. There's some hidden gems in there that we haven't discussed, and who knows, we may not even necessarily get to in the course of the podcast. In terms of next week, we are going to be heading, I think, over to Surfer's Paradise, aren't we? We're heading over to Chiba, where we took the car out and we went to, I've got 4 on the list there, but very different and very unique places in their own way, and some great stories that came from them as well. So make sure you tune in to next week's episode as well to hear about our trip to Chiba. In the meantime, please check us out on the website. We're on all the usual social media platforms. If you're listening to the podcast, please like us, please review us. We were delighted to find out that we're still number 1 in the music section of podcasts in Apple Japan, which is a fantastic achievement. So keep the likes coming, keep the comments coming. If there's anything you want to hear us talk about, a particular joint you want to hear about, please let us know through email or social media. And until next week, James, keep washing your hands, stay safe, and all the best.
And keep swinging. Talk to you soon, Philip. Bye-bye.
Bye.